Working into their 70s, doctors specializing in women and children's health are in short supply in Taiwan, with few coming through to replace them. Manufacturing giants could soon be footing the bill for Taiwan's unstable power grid. China scolds the Philippines for congratulating Ching-te on his election win. Plus, miniature masterpieces. One veteran artist in Taiwan is carving out his tiny legacy. Welcome to another edition of TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. Thanks for joining us. Taiwan's facing a shortage of doctors who specialize in children and childbirth. John Van Trieste looks at how a problem driven by Taiwan's low birth rate and tough working conditions could force people to travel abroad for care.
Dr. Xie Zhangtang is back at his Taipei hospital for another day of caring for pregnant women and new mothers. He's been doing it for more than 40 years and has reached his 70s. But while other specialists his age might be eyeing retirement, Dr. Xie feels a duty to his patients to keep on. That's because there's a big problem in his field. Taiwan has one of the world's lowest birth rates, and that's made obstetrics and gynecology, covering women's reproductive health, as well as pediatrics, or the care of children, unattractive to new doctors. The conditions of these two fields don't help. Dr. Xie is on call 24 hours a day. Without younger replacements, the average age of specialists in these fields is now 57, making them the oldest doctors in Taiwan.
常常形容妇产科医师，尤其是产科医师，低附加价值、高风险、劳力密集、传统手工业。现在做这个事情，不完全是说为了要过生活，是会觉得自己还有这个能力。
But no one can hold on forever. Some doctors fear that in 5 to 10 years, Taiwan will have to hire obstetricians from abroad, and that children needing serious special attention may need to go overseas for treatment.
恶性循环，因为年轻人会觉得说，那我走这一科以后，我是不是一辈子都要这样？这个事情不会系之间的崩盘，10年的断层，那这些人离开，就算以后有新的医师上来，那他的经验的传承会有一些缺失。
The health ministry is rewarding a bonus of around $300 for doctors in tough fields after February's Lunar New Year, and pediatrics is on the list. But whatever encouragement that might be, the doctor shortage shows no signs of going away soon. Chris Ma and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's government has been propping up its power industry despite glaring losses. But as the country plans to cut part of its nuclear energy supply later this year, experts say it'll only be more exposed to global energy price fluctuations. Sally Ensign has more.
In Taiwan, a stable energy supply isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's also about keeping its semiconductor industry running. But there's growing concern the country's power supply is being pushed to its limit.
我们现在能够祈祷的就是经济不要那么 成长那么好，半导体不要复苏那么快，不然的话，今年缺电压力很大。
Amid last year's global economic slump and fuel shortages, Taiwan's state-owned power company, Taipower, made record losses of $6.3 billion. That's despite subsidies from the government totaling $1.5 billion. And with plans to overhaul the country's power system this year, some are wondering how energy-intensive industry like chip manufacturing will cope.
今年呢，核三厂的1号机今年下半年要除役了。
That shutdown will affect an energy source providing around 7% of the country's power. The government says that it will make up the shortfall by increasing methane gas. But this fossil fuel is most prone to global price fluctuations.
经济还可以的时候，应该适当的反应，因为如果不适当的反应，万一下一波如果又来一个这个，就台电就完全再没有办法扮演当土强的一个角色。
Taiwan relies heavily on energy imports and has one of the lowest electricity prices in the world. Taipower usually takes the hit when global energy prices are high. The Deputy Economy Minister, who is also the head of Taipower, is trying to dampen these concerns.
在稳定物价上面，我们大概做了一定程度的消波块的功能，把整个输入性通膨稍微挡住了。那在这样子的角度之下，就是如果有税基剩余，台电公司也会把我们的财务状况很清楚的跟长官做报告，希望能够有一些支持。
Electricity prices were frozen before Taiwan's presidential elections, and new prices will be announced in April. Thanks to last year's huge financial losses, it's likely Taiwan's chip manufacturers and other industry heavyweights will have to pay more for what they use. Howard Zhang and Sally Ensign for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan saw more aggressive and sophisticated attempts at interference in its most recent election cycle, with Taiwan's presidential vote being one of the first of many leadership elections taking place around the world in 2024. Researchers are warning other countries to stay vigilant. Joyce Zeng reports.
Around 3 million votes in Taiwan's elections that just ended days ago were influenced by disinformation. That's according to a Taipei private research group, Taiwan AI Labs, that continually monitor online troll activity. The group's founder, Ethan Du, explained that around 3 million human users engaged with what he calls troll accounts, making them vulnerable to fake information campaigns. These troll accounts aren't actual people, but are bots that amplify narratives of PR companies and algorithms.
Genetic AI is already being used for attacking human beings. A lot of countries in the democratic countries, they are telling people, we should not look into the troll account because troll account is one of the freedom of speech. No, they are not.
Du says there's been a surge in troll activity aimed at causing chaos and division in Taiwan, and that many of these narratives match those of Beijing state media. And with a record amount of elections set to take place around the world this year, including the EU and the United States, Du has warned that other democracies like Taiwan may face an uphill battle to hold elections completely free from interference. Eason Chen and Joyce Zhen in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Beijing is scolding Manila after Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. congratulated Taiwan's President-elect Ching-te on his election victory.
我们建议马克思总统多读读书，正确了解台湾问题的来龙去脉，从而得出正确的结论。
Beijing summoned the Philippine ambassador in China and warned the country not to play with fire on the Taiwan issue. China says the recognition of Taiwan's president-elect violates the One China principle and Manila's political commitment to Beijing. China claims Taiwan as its own despite never having controlled it. The Philippines Foreign Ministry says Marcos's message recognized the mutual interests of the Philippines and Taiwan and reaffirmed its One China policy. Beijing's latest rebuke of Manila comes as relations continue to sour in the South China Sea. Reporter Rick Glowert spoke to Aaron Matthew Lariosa, an independent security analyst based in Washington, D.C., about the troubled China-Philippines relationship.
There's been quite a strong reaction from China, quite a rebuke of Marcos. How's that gone down in the Philippines and amongst the population there?
It is quite interesting to see China bring up this stuff. They clearly seem to not like any type of correlation between the Taiwan and Philippines, as we've seen back in spring of last year, actually, when the 4 new EDCA sites opened up across the Philippines, or were announced across the Philippines with the United States. The sites close to Taiwan did kind of alarm Beijing, and Beijing sent a strongly worded statement via their ambassador to Manila to not stoke anything related to Taiwan. I think it's still a bit too early to tell, but generally speaking, anything related with China, this isn't Manila's or the Filipino people's first rodeo with aggressive Chinese statements. They see this all the time in the South China Sea.
And how is the Philippines and China relationship changing? How does the situation in the South China Sea, for example, and the ongoing hostilities there affect this relationship?
Because of Beijing's actions in the South China Sea, as we've seen over the past year or two, it's really hard to continue a good faith relationship when China keeps harassing Philippine fishing vessels within their EEZ, when they keep building up islands, and when they just, it's a lot of not a lot of goodwill to be had. So the relationship, Manila is desperately trying to hold on, desperately trying to do a balancing act. But as the security aspect continues to take over, we keep seeing Manila go to international partners for increased defense and security cooperation. As we've seen this year, a lot of international developments, specifically military related, with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other partners. So as that relationship continues to deteriorate, at least on the security side, Manila is looking for new partners.
How might Taiwan and the Philippines align or cooperate when it comes to confronting Chinese military aggression in the region?
Both countries deal with a lot of illegal fishing within their waters. As we know, the Taiwanese Coast Guard catches a lot of these trawlers and brings them in. And as we know, in the South China Sea, a lot of illegal activities within that region. So a lot of the ways the Philippine Coast Guard has been interacting internationally is increased Coast Guard cooperation. That technically is not military cooperation. It is maritime security cooperation, which both countries overlap. Again, it's really hard just because, again, Manila has to balance between all of the powers in the region and, of course, the United States. So they are pretty risk adverse when it comes to cooperation.
That was reporter Rick Glauert speaking with independent security analyst Aaron Matthew Lariosa about the Philippines' relations with China and Taiwan. South Korea has slapped new sanctions on North Korea just days after the country test-fired a hypersonic missile. It comes amid increasing tensions on the Korean peninsula. Jaime Ocon has more.
In his first speech of 2024, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un outlines his country's ambitions. This time, the authoritarian leader is taking aim at neighboring South Korea, naming it the North's primary enemy, and warning that Pyongyang does not intend to avoid war.
대한민국이라는 최대의 적국이 우리의 가장 가까운 이웃에 병전하고 있는 특수한 환경과 미국 놈들이 주도하에 군사적 긴장 격화로 지역 정세의 불안정성이 증대되고 있는 현실을 냉철하게 고찰해 보면 물리적 충돌에 의한 확전으로 전쟁이 발발할 위험은 현저히 높아졌고.
The Korean peninsula was split between the North and South at the end of World War II. Despite signing a truce at the end of the Korean War, the two sides are technically still at war, and the goal of unification has continued to fade. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol quickly denounced Kim's accusations, saying that these claims ignore the peninsula's long and complex history.
북한 당국은 남북 관계를 동족 관계가 아닌 적대적 두 국가 관계로 규정했습니다. 이는 북한 정권 스스로가 반민족적이고 반역사적 집단이라는 사실을 자인한 것입니다.
In recent years, North Korea has stepped up its weapons program, firing more than 36 missiles in 2023. The most recent test, a new type of solid-fuel hypersonic missile, one that can travel more than 5 times the speed of sound. Analysts say that this weapon could help North Korea break through U.S. and South Korean missile defense systems.
북한의 목표는 러시아와 중국과 같은 수준의 그와 비견되는 수준의 어떤 극초음속 미사일을 개발을 하고 싶을 겁니다. 그래야지 미국과 한국의 미사일 방어 체계를 확실하게 돌파할 수 있는 그런 가능성이 더 높아지는 거니까요.
Eyeing increased threats from the North, allies like the U.S. and Japan have stepped up military cooperation with South Korea, with more joint exercises expected later this year. But the recent statements from leaders on both sides about a potential war are dimming hopes for a peaceful resolution. Analysts say this cycle of reactionary displays of force highlights South Korea's emphasis on deterrence to prevent a conflict on the peninsula.
With South Korea, when they talk about unification, it isn't necessarily peaceful unification. It is unification by absorption. And, all of the moves that they've been making, especially in the past couple of years to increase and strengthen extended deterrence, is really against North Korea.
Analysts fear that a heavier South Korean and U.S. military presence could trigger North Korea to test a nuclear weapon, something it hasn't done since 2017. And with Kim Jong-un warning of preparations for war, there are concerns that any attempts to de-escalate the situation might come too late. Joseph Wu and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
South Korea, Japan, and the United States have conducted joint naval drills near the Korean peninsula. The exercises come one day after North Korea launched its new hypersonic missile. 9 warships, including 1 U.S. aircraft carrier, took part in the exercises off South Korea's southern coast. U.S. military authorities say the exercises were aimed at bolstering deterrence and response capabilities against North Korea. It's the first trilateral drill since the three countries agreed to share information on Pyongyang's missile launches last month. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging global partners to help rebuild Ukraine. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Zelensky asked for support for a new peace plan to end the war with Russia and did not repeat his request for weapons from the previous year. The peace plan calls for a complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine. Russia has rejected the plan but has indicated that it would be open to a ceasefire. Pakistan has condemned Iranian airstrikes inside its borders, calling it an unprovoked violation of its airspace. The country's foreign ministry warned of serious consequences for the attack they say killed 2 children. Iran said it used missile and drone strikes to destroy 2 Sunni militant group strongholds in Balochistan province in Pakistan's southwest. The attacks came less than a day after Iran carried out missile strikes in Syria and northern Iraq. Coming up, China's birth rate hit a record low in 2023, and the country's population decline is speeding up.
When people talk about the Chinese attack on Taiwan,
the general consensus is that it could well be 2027.
Will the U.S. come help us?
Yes, we have a commitment.
But how? The United States would be there to defend Taiwan.
Take the form of a mutual defense.
美军跟国军并肩作战，有没有可能？
Operation 2027, every Friday, 7 p.m. on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. U.S. lawmakers are planning to put an end to the double taxation of Taiwanese workers and companies in the U.S. The proposal is part of a tax package that aims to reduce withholding taxes for eligible Taiwanese in the U.S. The deal would provide benefits similar to other countries that have formal tax treaties with the U.S. It's likely to anger Beijing, which views actions like this as recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign nation. Taiwanese investment in China plummeted last year to a 21-year low. Taiwan's economy ministry says businesses invested around $3 billion in China in 2023, a nearly 40% drop from the year before. The number of Taiwanese investment projects in China also dropped by around 10%. It comes as Taipei seeks to diversify its trade and investment away from Beijing by developing economic relations with other countries. China has a record of using economic measures to put pressure on Taiwan. To learn more about what declining investment means for Taiwan and China, our reporter Jeremy Olivier spoke with the Economist Intelligence Unit's lead analyst for global trade, Nick Marro.
So, Taiwanese investment has been on a general downward trend since it hit its peak around 2010 to 2011. But 40% is a pretty big decline. So why did we see such a big drop last year?
If you look into the data, we first started to see outward investment towards destinations that are not China really start to pick up around 2015, 2016, really eclipse the investment that was destined towards China. And that coincides with a period of realization by foreign companies in general that, for example, manufacturing bases in Southeast Asia were just a lot more cost effective. But in the past couple of years, undoubtedly, it's tied to geopolitics and the risks tied to doing business in China, as well as the fact that the Chinese growth engine is somewhat sputtering at this moment. Foreign investors in general have become incredibly wary of the Chinese market because of the increasingly difficult operational considerations that are affecting their businesses, as well as the fact that policy clarity is just worsening.
So much of China's 21st century status as the factory of the world has been staked on the success of Taiwanese firms who are invested there. So what could this recent decline mean for the Chinese economy?
I think maybe there are two things that we can look at in terms of what this means for the Chinese economy. The first is the fact that as the economy becomes a lot more closed off, this has ramifications for trade ties, ramifications for diplomatic relations, cross-strait linkages specifically in general are are very much bolstered by the fact that economic linkages between Taiwan and China are robust, and that has been a stabilizing force for both of those markets. China's industry is still relatively dependent on foreign inputs. Even its tech sector is still heavily reliant on Taiwanese chips and other intermediate components. And so if we start to see a fall off in economic ties, specifically trade, but also investment, then there are questions around where can the Chinese tech sector go from here? There is a strong push to replace Taiwanese products and Taiwanese businesses with, say, Chinese alternatives, but the verdict is still out in terms of how successful China will be able to actually achieve this goal.
What could the exodus of investment by Taiwanese businesses mean for those companies?
There's a really strong wave of interest right now among Taiwanese businesses in looking further afield. We're seeing a lot of interest right now in Southeast Asia, but also places like Mexico, given the proximity to the US market. I think a lot of Taiwanese investors are kind of waking up to this idea that as important as the Chinese market has been for their operations over the past couple of decades, it can no longer be the one-all, end-all.
That was the Economist Intelligence Unit's Nick Marro speaking with Jeremy Olivier. China says its economy grew 5.2% last year. The growth rate met analysts' expectations, and China's own annual target is higher than the previous year when China's economy grew just 3% due to COVID lockdowns and a real estate slump. But it's still one of China's lowest annual growth rates in 30 years. China's population has decreased for the second year in a row. Analysts say it's a sign of growing economic and social issues within the country. Tiffany Wong has the story.
2 years after strict COVID lockdowns in China, singles in Shanghai are beginning to mingle again. Like Victor Li, a 32-year-old entrepreneur who has attended several mixers like this one to find a wife. He wants to start a family, but says the country's economic problems are a barrier.
比如说我们结婚的成本很高了，尤其在上海这样的一个大都市的话，比如说可能结婚就面临着我们需要在这个地方安家，那房子肯定是一个必不可少的东西。
The country is facing record low marriage and birth rates, with the population declining for the second year in a row. But experts say the economy isn't the only reason. Though now abolished, a decades-old one-child policy to limit the country's population might still be imprinted in young people's concept of family.
这个 one-child policy 已经重塑了人们的生育观念，因为这个只有一个孩子已经成为一种社会的习惯。
China's low birth rate has sparked concerns that a shrinking workforce could stunt its future economic growth. But the country's leaders maintain the economy is doing just fine.
刚刚过去的2023年，中国经济总体回升向好，预计我们的经济总量 GDP 的增幅在5.2%左右，高于我们去年年初确定的5%左右的目标。
But as the population shrinks, that recovery may be out of reach unless Chinese officials address the country's deep-rooted social and economic problems to salvage this generation's dreams of having a family of their own. John Su and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Just in time for the Year of the Dragon, artist Chen Fengxian has made a new gold miniature to add to his Chinese zodiac series, Yu Jinghang reports.
A dragon sculpture that only comes to life under a magnifying glass. This is the latest addition to Chen Fengxian's Chinese zodiac series. A renowned master of miniatures in Taiwan, Chen has been creating these tiny animals for 6 years. Gold pigs, chickens, and goats. Each one represents a Chinese zodiac sign, and each piece takes months to craft.
这一件是那个鸡的全家福哦，爸爸妈妈3个小孩，还有蛋壳哦，这一件全家福的感觉很幸福。
But Chen says the dragon has been the most challenging yet.
有时雕了龙须，雕好了，但是我雕龙角的时候，一转个所谓的方向，龙须碰断掉了。所以说，一直的在失败，一直的在所谓的克服困难。
Chen has worked with miniatures for decades, having explored all kinds of unconventional mediums. He's used ants' heads and bees' wings, taking inspiration from a classic martial arts fantasy novel. But as someone who used to do engravings on Taiwan's banknotes, He particularly enjoys making portraits.
是往前梳的，有点飘逸的感觉啊，还有他的脸庞啊，大头大脸的那种感觉。
It's former U.S. President Donald Trump, carved onto this rice grain around the time he was elected in 2016. Chen says these portraits are a unique way to mark historical events, like these bricks, documenting Taiwan's just concluded presidential election.
我雕了3位总统候选人啊，那这3位总统候选人呢啊，各有他的所谓的特色啊。
Having navigated a wide range of mediums and materials, Chen has high hopes for his gold series.
黄金是一个永恒不灭的素材，我从事艺术这么久了啊，那也想朝这个永恒的这个方向去打造出一系列的作品。
Miniatures don't get as much exposure as other art forms, but Chen says he plans to continue on his solitary path, challenging himself for as long as he lives. Patrick Chen, Piqi Zhang, and Yujin Huang for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. Be sure to check out our website and social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Before we go, check out the world's largest iceberg drifting somewhere out there in the Antarctic Ocean. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care, and I'll see you next time.